My topic today, welcome again. Those of you who I didn't get to greet, good morning or good afternoon, wherever you might be. Good evening for some folks. May have some folks where it's nighttime where they are. My topic today is design processes are overrated. Now, I will preface this by saying that this is, a lot of it is hypothesis. And when I say that, but you'll see it as we go. I don't think I need to explain it, but I'm presenting to you a very sound hypothesis that I want people to take into consideration. And as we go through this, I think you'll understand why I say that. A little bit about me, just to get started. And I think it's important for you to know who's talking to you before we get going. I'm a big proponent of making presentations a bit more humane, a bit more friendly, a bit more, hey, I'm there. Hey, I'm just another one of you kind of things. So just a little quick introduction about myself. I have been practicing in UX now for technically 26 years. This is my 26th year of working in what we now know as UX. Of course, it wasn't called UX back then. It is now. So, but been around for a bit, designed my first website in 1995 and using principles that we now use as UX professionals. So, hey, yeah, I took credit for it. And I was doing a lot of stuff, had a freelance web design business back in the day. So been around for a bit. Another one of the reasons, as Debbie would say, why should we care? Why should we listen to you? I have a UX related master's degree from Syracuse University. I have a second master's degree in user experience design from Kent State. Yes, that was a mistake to get a second master's degree, but I got it, so here it is. And I speak a lot all over the place, all over the world. That's hence the World Usability Day logo there, just as a common logo that some folks might be familiar with. That's my lovely wife, Angela, who is on the call today. Feel free to give her a shout and say hello to her. Angie and I we love cats. We have 4, and that's our little boy, Rocky, there, who that photo was actually featured in the Michigan Humane Society calendar. And speaking of that, that picture was taken by me. I happen to be an award-winning photographer as well. That's my Sony A9. I love Sony. I love bicycling to the extent that I lost 100 pounds. And a big chunk of it was due to my bicycling efforts. So I love that. And I like bowling. I'm a big bowler. I used to be a member of the Professional Bowlers Association. Those of you might be familiar with the acronym of PBA. And that happens to be a screenshot of my first 300 game, my first sanctioned 300 games. So just a little bit about me on the personal side, so that we're not just a talking head, that you can actually relate to me a little bit and understand my expertise that ties into what I'm going to be talking about today, and why I even bother taking the time to present the hypothesis that I want to present to you. So a little bit about my experience as well. I am accomplished. I have done a lot of work. This professional footprint that you see before you is not all inclusive by any means. I have worked on tons of websites, tons of apps, tons of projects, not just in the digital arena. I've also done work on non-digital efforts, applying UX principles there. I have come to the point where I've learned that UX is basically pervasive and it can be applied to practically anything. But just a little quick snapshot of where I have worked, where I've been involved, and I have had the privilege of having my hand in millions of dollars worth of projects. So again, why should you listen? Why should you care? What gives me the authority to speak? This is another example of why, the whys associated with that. So all that said, let's get into the content today. And we want to start off today by level setting. We want to make sure we're all speaking the same language, that we're all looking at the same things. So we're talking about processes. We're talking about how the design processes are overrated. And so we start off by something I like to do. Let's make sure we're all, when we hear the word process, I want to make sure we're all thinking the same thing. And so the definition, and this comes from Cambridge Dictionary, a series of actions taken in order to achieve a result. Again, a series of actions taken in order to achieve a result. That's basically all that a process is. But I did decide to take this one step further, and I've got another definition for you: a repeatable, formulaic way to get things done. So the first definition was from Cambridge, and the second one is from the dude that's giving the presentation. This is how I would define process if we were just discussing things, in addition to going and getting a formal definition as well. I think it's important to level set. If we're not speaking the same language, it's easy for us to go in multiple directions, and then the presentation is not going to be that effectual. A few factoids about processes. They're basically automatic. And somebody may already be saying, well, Darren, isn't the topic design processes are overrated? Yeah, hang in there with me though. And you'll get it when we're done. Processes are automatic. Anytime we do anything, whether it's brushing teeth, making coffee, washing the car, vacuuming the floor, changing a diaper, no matter what it is, we always, even if we don't start off with a process, we end up with a process, and the purpose of the process is so we can achieve efficiencies within our operation. So they're automatic. They're just always going to be a process, whether you formalize it or not, whether you list out the steps or not. They're automatic. Processes are second nature. As we sort of alluded, anything we do ends up becoming a process. Again, if we're going to achieve any level of efficiency, there's going to be that process we're going to get into. It's going to come to us naturally, and we're just going to do it. Eventually, we get to the point where if you start out with a list, you end up operating without a list, because by that time it's second nature, and you just end up doing things. Processes are inevitable. This may seem redundant, but I want to make sure we're looking at this topic from every side of the house, so to speak. Processes are inevitable. You're not going to be able to get around them. You're not going to be able to ignore them. Even if you don't have one, you have one, because you're following certain steps in your head, or you're going a certain way when you're doing a thing. So there's always a process, even when somebody says there's not a process. So we want to tap into another expert on such things. We want to tap into YODA today. And my best attempt at a yoga impression was processes. Good they are. So YODA believes in processes. We should embrace processes. Now, basically speaking, a little humor injected there, but there's really no shortage of them. There's a lot of people are saying today, the best UX process. There is no the best UX process. The best process is the one that fits for your organization and for the project that you're working on. There is no, this is the way we've got to do it. If you change a couple of the elements, the factors that are a part of what you're doing, your process can quickly and easily change. But there is no shortage, and it's important that we know and understand that as well. So that said, why don't we review a few? We're not going to deep dive them, but we want to illustrate what's going on in the world of processes, and in a sense, we'll take a little bit of a tour down memory lane, or looking at some of the history, because a couple of the processes here you may not have heard of before, but I think it just helps to drive home what it is we want to present to you on today. The first one, some of us might be familiar with this, is Addie. Addie, which stands for Analyze, Design, Develop, Implement, and Evaluate, was something that did not really have a huge presence in the software design and development world. It did not really have a presence in the UX world at all. There might be a few people that have decided to use it, but then again, that's sort of a little of a nudge, and you'll see why I say that later. But Addie was big in the world of instructional design, in the world of training, in the world of education. Addie was an approach that was an age-old approach that was used to get things done. But basically speaking, this is a process. Now, after a few years, there were a few people who were taught Addie, and in analyzing Addie and taking a closer look at it, they felt that they could improve on things. And so they came up with what was called the 5C framework. And it's called the 5C framework because the 5 elements all start with the letter C. I'm going to try to refrain from giving you some editorial comment on this one. I'll save that for later. But the 5 steps are capture, start with a clear plan, conceptualize. So they want you to prototype almost immediately. After you get your plan, they want you to dive into prototyping. Next, they want you to create. So you're going to go from that prototype and examining it and seeing what's valid, what's not. And then you start building things. You start to enter what somebody would say the design phase from a UX perspective, but we build with confidence from there. Number 4, then they want to start improving and refining. And some people might think of that as iteration. And then the last step is to commercialize, really to deliver. And they just threw the word commercialize up there because really you're delivering, you're deploying, but they had to stick with the 5 C's. That's one of the editorial things I thought I wasn't going to say, but I really can't help but say it. I find it a little comical to me, but I tend to laugh at almost everything anyway, as some of you know. So that's the 5C framework. But again, another process. Is this something that comes into the world of UX? I'm going to say no and yes, and you'll see why I say that later. The third one we're going to look at here is something that a lot of people never considered what James Garrett put together as a design process. But the dude during the presentation did. I was exposed to this in 2002, about the time the book was published. And I began to see this as an approach. There are also some variations of this that James Garrett created that show you the same 5 planes, but from a different angle. And so I'm only sharing this one where part of it shows you the web from a hypertext system. And all of this was web-based. It was all presented from a digital perspective back at that time. And this is included in his book about the elements of user experience, which is still good. UX content has a long shelf life, and this is another one. And then the other side shows web from a software interface perspective. There is something I want to point out here also before I show you these 5 steps. And we don't have to really spend a lot of time on these 5 steps because I'm going to present them again later. But you have the task-oriented side, and then you have the information, or some would say the object-oriented side. Now, it's interesting to note in this approach that as he talks about first you want to talk about the user needs and the site objectives, then you want to look at the functional specifications and the requirements. You want to look at the interaction design and information architecture. You want to look at the information design, which can be separated into interface design itself and design of the navigation. And then you've got visual design or the presentation layer. It goes from being abstract to concrete, or it goes from conception to completion. But you'll notice that the separation from task and information, there are some people today that are trying to push what they call object-oriented UX, and they're trying to separate task from information or object as if it's new. It's not. It was presented in 2002, and this happens a lot in the world of UX today, where people will present something as new when it's really old, and they really end up taking advantage of people who had no knowledge of the previous information. So they accept it as new. It's not new. Does it mean that the presentation is wrong? Not necessarily, but it's not new. And so people need to make sure, I'm a big advocate of UX practitioners, making sure you understand the history of the discipline, because it will keep you from being taken advantage of by people who are just trying to make a name for themselves. And there's my UX Uncensored Raw moment, one of a few, I'm sure, for this presentation. But I looked at this as a process, and in the early parts of my career, this is what I used to design. Once I learned it, I was like, this is a great way to approach things. I was already doing it to a degree, but I liked having this framework, if you will, which is another word, a synonym really for processes. So then we've got Agile, and somebody might say this is not a process, but technically it is. They even refer to it as a framework in many cases. And it's funny that Agile, you're really hard pressed to find it executed the same way from organization to organization, but this is still the approach that is being used to get the work done. Remember what the definition of a process is. This is it. So you've got planning, requirement analysis, design, development, testing, and then deployment. And then, of course, iteration is part of that. And you just keep going and going through your sprints, whether it be a 1 or 2 or 3 week sprint, whatever it might be, and you keep pressing away until you get things done. But this is just, it's another process. And so some companies do it. Matter of fact, a lot of companies do. And if you're thinking, hey, what about if agile is indeed a process, isn't it weird to use 2 processes? No, it's not. A lot of times there is a sort of a framework that's loose in that it provides you with the framework, but how you actually get the work done then begs another process that's interjected, such as here in the design step of the agile process, another process can be used to get the design work done. So you don't necessarily have to use one process. It's possible to use multiple processes to get the work done, just so we can address that, just in case anybody had that question or was curious. Then you've got double diamond, which I've sort of begun to gravitate toward a little, just when it comes to the way that you have things settling in your mind. But something else I will point out is here phase 1 is to understand, then you define, then you develop, and then you finalize. Was I really doing that before? Yeah, I was. There's also another version of double diamond where you actually identify who the key players are associated with each. So we're not showing that here, but that's another process, and that's out there as well. Something else I like about what they do at Double Diamond, because I think that this really helps to communicate with stakeholders a lot, because I'm not going to use the 5 planes to communicate with them. I have, but this, because it's more mainstream, because it's something that a lot of people see, it makes it easier in many cases to be able to communicate. So ask, listen, and sort is the first part, and then create, test, and design is another. And then in the first diamond, you've got the problem. And then the second diamond, you have the solution. And in between, you define it. So this is yet another process. And I'm sure a lot of us are using it. And I'm sure it's quick and easy to digest. And I'm all about digestion when it comes to communication. So this is something else that's cool. Here's another one, including this mostly just for the purpose of showing the fact that there are a ton of processes out here. The folks at Envision actually have come up with 2 processes. Yes, these 2 processes live on their site today, and they're not necessarily parallel with each other. So this is another one of those places for editorial comment on my part, because basically we've got the first process that's here that shows research and then exploring and then creation and then validating and then iterating. Is there anything wrong with that approach? No, there's not. Just so we understand. And that's I'm sort of giving you a sneak peek at where we're going and at the end of this now, and published as in 2020, if my memory serves me correctly. They had another process that was shared on their site, and they say you need to understand, research, analyze, design, launch, and then analyze again. And then somebody on the other side of the road will say, no, well, isn't that just iteration? And they would actually be correct. And so a lot of these things, if you're probably thinking this already as well, isn't this just a bunch of change of nomenclature? Yeah. So you're starting to get it. You're starting to digest what I'm getting at today. It's simply a change in nomenclature, because the work, I'm going to get ahead of myself. And then we got to show this puppy, which is like taking the world by storm, in a sense. And we've got a little bit, this is my big editorial piece today. Design thinking consists of, from a basic perspective, 5 steps: empathizing, defining, ideating, prototyping, and testing. And as you can see, it's pretty big, so you can probably read some of the other elements, the commentary that's here. Part of what I want to point out, though, again, this is what you see mainstream. But you also see all of this. And please take note to the example in the lower right-hand corner, because that was created by IDEO, and they were the people who actually popularized design thinking initially. And it should be interesting to note that as more and more people are dipping their toes in the pool of design thinking, so to speak, that people are coming up with their different versions of it. They're modifying it, And they're again, the nomenclature is changing, the execution is changing. And take special note of what Stanford did, because Stanford's education, and they have those same little shapes there with the same steps that we just showed you. One of the things I think that's interesting about what Stanford has done, if you look at the notes where they'll say, okay, to empathize, you have interviews, shadowing, seeking to understand, being non-judgmental, and then defining, you've got 5 steps. All of these, you've got these steps. And basically what they're doing is they're taking things that we were already doing in UX and they're just calling it design thinking. That's what's interesting about design thinking, is that they're not doing anything differently than what we were doing before. We just didn't call it design thinking. And the part where you have people participating in these workshops before in UX, we were still talking to subject matter experts. We were still talking to clients. If anything, the work is being dumbed down in the sense that the users are being shut out of the process. And when you remove the U from UX, all you get is X. And that's not a good thing. We just got to say that. Here's a few more examples, and the one in the upper right, they say design thinking turns into art thinking. They just want to just throw design thinking out completely, which again I find hilarious. And then you see a more full-blown aspect of the design thinking process. These people are not all on the same page, even when it comes to design thinking, and it doesn't really work all that well. So it's critical to note that. And so everybody, you got some people like the lady on the left here who thinks, oh, this is phenomenal. Keep in mind, she hasn't tried to apply it yet. She just thinks it's phenomenal. So it's like you see a car and you like it, and then after 3 months you feel differently. It's sort of the same thing. Then you got somebody that's like the lady in the middle. She's just confused because she sees all these different examples. She hears all these different thoughts. Things are all over the place, and she is just struggling with it. Then you have somebody that's smug, like the guy on the right, who looks confident, but inside his head, he's confused too. So how about we just sum all this up by looking at what Don Norman has to say about this? I think we care what Don Norman thinks, and it'll be funny. I remember Debbie telling the story once about somebody she mentioned Don Norman to, and the person said, who is that? They had no idea who Don Norman was. If you don't know, you don't know, but once you find out, you've got to pay attention. He is what many will consider to be one of the fathers of the UX profession. He is the first person to have UX in his title when he worked for Apple. He wrote the design of everyday things. He is still a leader in the world of UX. And he said in a recent presentation, and you can find the video up on YouTube, he said design thinking by itself is worthless. I think we need to embrace what Don Norman is saying. Now, keep in mind again, however, that a lot of design thinking is just the rebranding of UX. So the steps are okay. You just have to make sure you include everything. You've got to include the users. You've got to do research. You cannot shut out certain aspects of UX and still think that you're going to achieve the same thing that what some people will call OG UX. You can't do this and get done what we used to get done, or what some of us still get done, because some of us are not going this route today. A lot of people who go this route because they don't know anything about the actual major tenets of UX. So just something to keep in mind. So a high level look, here's Addie. Here's the 5C bit, the 5 planes, which again, not many people use it as design processes. I did. It doesn't mean that everybody else did. Then you've got, I included just one example from Envision, the double diamond, agile, and then design thinking. So here's your high level look. This is what's going on, but how about we take a more analytical look? And then I think people are probably already starting to see this, but Addie, analyze, design, develop, implement, evaluate, 5 C's. Capture, conceptualize, create, cultivate, commercialize. the 5 planes, needs and objectives, requirements and specs, information architecture and interaction design, navigation interface and information design, and then the visual design, that top plane, the presentation layer, agile, planning, requirements analysis, design, development, testing, and then deployment. Double diamond, understand, define, develop, finalize. Envision, understand, research, analyze, design, launch, analyze again. And then design thinking, empathize, define, ideate, prototype, and test. Do you see what I see today? I said it was a hypothesis, but you can see it's a little bit more than a hypothesis. We just start from a hypothetical perspective. When you really look at these things, and yes, there are other processes, but you will find they're doing the same thing. They're using different terminology to explain the same thing in many instances, most, not all, but most, changing the name, changing the approach. And then the funny thing is, they're really all the same exact door. They're just all different colors. So hence, when we look at design processes, ascribing more to them than what they really are, they then become overrated. They're at that point, we're not just looking at it as a process. A process is a means to an end. It's not this all-inclusive. It's not this what do you call it, silver bullet. It's great. It's fantastic. It's needful, but there's emphasis being put on design processes, especially if you think that you're differentiating from someone else, because you're not really doing that. Picture, if you will, we've got some teapots up here. Picture, if you will, let's pretend that these teapots are websites. 5 different companies engage in 5 different processes to deploy their websites, whether it's a new site or a redesign. No matter what process they all embrace, at the end of the day, they all produce a teapot/website. That said, what was really gained in the differentiation? Maybe there's some different efficiencies. No argument there. But the thing is, everybody embraced a process because remember, they're inevitable, they're second nature, they're going to happen, and they're good. They're good for efficiency. They're good to optimize the flow of your work. But when the dust settles, you just have a teapot. So, and then how you got there, nobody cares. I just want to be able to boil water so that I can make my tea. That's all anybody cares about. I want it to fit in my hand the right way. I want it to be comfortable. I want the ability to pour to be simple. Everybody just focused on the experience. At the end of the day, nobody cares about the process, but the people who were doing the work. And especially when they get ready to go on to the next project. So overrated, folks, overrated. Then we've got this. We've got this element that I think we've established. I hope folks can see it, that there's an overrated set of elements associated with processes, and people take things too far. Well, it gets worse, because when it comes to recruiting, I've experienced this. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have experienced this. You interview for a job and they ask you about your design process. What process did you use? Now, keep in mind, everybody has a process. So really the only thing we need to do is validate that a person understands the viability and the value of process. And maybe if you're in an agile environment, maybe you want to confirm that somebody has worked in agile before and see how well versed they are, confirm what their acumen, their level of acumen is when it comes to agile. But again, what 2 companies are applying agile the same exact way? They're not. I've been in agile in several institutions, and when they say that they use agile, I sort of chuckle a little bit internally, and then I just wait to see what they're going to do, because they're going to do it differently, and very few even care about doing it by the book. So when you ask someone if they are familiar with Agile, if they say yes, okay, fine. And then maybe they'll talk about it a little bit, but they're still going to have to get up to speed with how you do things in your organization anyway. If they haven't worked in an Agile environment, what is it going to take for them to get familiar with it? Not very much. I've never seen anybody struggle to get on board with working in an Agile environment in my entire career, and I've seen hundreds of people do it. It's not an issue. So the other thing that happens is people come into an interview when they're asked about the issue of process and what their process was, and people begin to discriminate if the process that the person presented isn't something that they're familiar with. And if it's not, here's when it really gets bad. When people say, I love double diamond. I will only accept a person who does double diamond. Double diamond is an offshoot of design thinking, if you will, and it's a more practical approach to stereotypical design thinking today. I've talked to people about using 5 planes. There is no difference between that and what's being done in double diamond when you look at the practical aspect of it. So bottom line is this: when it comes to recruiting, people, because they engage with design processes from an overrated perspective, they reach the point where they start to discriminate. They reach the point where they begin to stir up, to stimulate the application of bias. And so now we're no longer evaluating the candidates in an objective and a fair manner. Everybody uses processes. There isn't a person who doesn't. So changing from one process to another, if they have not used the process that you love or that your team is using, if they don't understand the fact that processes are actually layered many times to get the work done, if we don't understand that, we're overrating processes, and then we end up behaving in an unethical manner. That's not where we want to be. And you end up missing out on good talent over something that didn't matter in some cases. And you embrace the person who did have the same process as you, and then you find out later they really didn't know how to do the work anyway. So there is a lot of impact on recruiting because of people overrating design processes. Make yourself a committee of one. Make sure you're not one of them. It's important that we have this right frame of mind today. So as we begin to wrap up, remember, a process is nothing more than a series of actions that produce a result. That's all that it is. It's a means to an end. A means to an end, I should say. Processes are inevitable. They're second nature, and they're good. Good they are. They're just good. Okay, so it's not a problem. We're not demonizing processes. We just want to make sure people look at them the right way, leave them in their place so that we don't put emphasis on things that we should not. There's no shortage of options. There's always going to be a bunch of processes. There's tons of processes I didn't cover today, and there will always be. So no issue there. But just remember that. They are all, however, from a functional perspective, from a practical perspective, they're all practically the same. The end result is always a deliverable. There are 10 ways to get to the closest amusement park. 10 ways. We all get there. We all get on the rides. And we could all have started out at the same place. I mean, there's just different ways to go about doing it. But the end result is that there's always a deliverable. We always end up just accomplishing the goal that we set out to do. The best process, there is no the best process. The best process is the one that best serves your organization's needs and best service the initiative that you're undertaking. So let's keep that in mind. And there are a lot of articles out there, the best UX process. That's when it's time you laugh and go elsewhere, because they're engaging in hype, and so that means that they're trying to manipulate you. So I'm out. I'm not looking at that. It's good to have processes, but make sure you keep things focused. See the process as the process. It's the means to an end. This is how we're going to get the work done. That's it. It's how we're going to get the work done. No more, no less. Don't engage in discriminatory evaluation practices. Don't allow your mindset toward processes to cause you to look at someone, give them stink eye because of the processes they have or have not used. And so, because that's just not a good thing. All processes are basically the same. And especially when you look at the proof in the pudding, what has this person produced? And what process the person used to get there, does it really matter? And even if they do show you how the things that they've produced, if they used a process differently than what you're using, but what they produced is fantastic, that's another reason to not discriminate against somebody because they used a different process. It's only necessary to confirm that a person understands the value, the necessity, the viability of process. That's really just a common sense check. Because as we stated, they're inevitable, they're second nature, they're going to be, so just ask them to explain what happened, and if they can't explain it, they didn't do the work. That's another reason to ask. Outside of that, though, it doesn't bring a lot of value. Remember, and we said this a couple of times, there's no such thing as the UX design process. So when you hear that, again, that's hype, we can lose that. And then lastly, if processes are used beyond their original intent, or not seen for what they truly are, then they're overrated. So that's it. That's the presentation. That is the end of the talk. Where can you find me? Thank you, everybody, for filing in today and for joining us in this track and for my talk. You can always find me. Of course, I show up on Debbie's show once a month with Debbie, Dr. Nick, and I. We do the Three Amigos Ask Me Anything session, so you can find me there. My podcast is a year old now. We just celebrated our year anniversary of the World of UX with Darren Hood. You can find that anywhere that podcasts are distributed. I'm on Twitter under Darren Hood, under UX Uncensored, under the World of UX. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on I have a Facebook page. I'm on Instagram now. I have a YouTube channel that is, we just got our 100th subscriber, and we're going to start rolling out brand new content just in the not too distant future. Currently, they're all old recordings of talks, but they're all still worth tapping into. I've started writing on Medium. My most recent one you see there, Tales from the End to Script, where I tell some UX nightmare stories, as well as sharing the story behind the comic strip that we just rolled out. And I'm also now on Pinterest. And then lastly, we just started a new social media initiative called Engage. If you want the link, reach out to me via email or on LinkedIn, and I'll shoot the link to you, where we can talk about nothing but UX. This is the social media just for UX professionals. We don't have to worry about the algorithms. We don't have to worry about the trolling, all this other crazy stuff. We can just talk about UX. And so reach out to me. I will get you that link, and we will share with you the opportunity for you to come and sign up and talk with us. Uninhibited UX talk. So that's it, folks. That's it for my talk. Again, thank you. And we are going to dive into any Q&A. So I was a speaker, but I'm also the host. So Randy is here. I almost want to ask Randy to come up and do the Q&A. But what questions do you have? I've got to go through all of this stuff here to find the Q&A. Do we have a Q&A link, don't we? Or a session where, yeah, there we go. There we go. All right. Thank you. All right. I just remembered. So Irina said, thanks for this presentation. What's your advice for our practice? Since all the processes are basically the same, what do we do when a recruiter or a potential business partner asks us what we practice? Do we answer what they want to hear? Is that fair? So some of you know me. You already know what I'm going to say. Never, ever, 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 ever lie. Ever. If you see my model on emotional intelligence, and you hear some of the things that I say sometime on my podcast, being disingenuous, that's not ethical. We have to build trust as UX professionals. And so part of that is making sure that we're pure, that we're being genuine, that we're being real about everything. So we never tell anybody what they want to hear, ever, 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 ever. Tell them who we are. Represent yourself accurately, represent yourself ethically. And if they don't like you, they don't like you. then that's fine. There's another 150, 200 job opportunities. Go out there and get them. But you want to be matched up with the right company. You'd be surprised that some people, they lie to get into a place, and then when they get into a place, they find out they don't want to be there. Well, you lied, now you're in there. Don't lie, be truthful. A lot of people are lying. It's something that I've noticed. I started noticing in about 2013, 2014. People lie to get a lot of UX positions, but don't make sure you're not one of them, because it's going to come back to bite you in the end. And if you cross paths with me, I'm known for spotting these people in 5 seconds, and I will push my little ejector seat button and toss you as soon as we find out that you're lying. It's amazing how popular it is, but it is what it is, and that's the world we live in. But if we want to do it the right way, if you want your UX you want to build trust and have the clients and stakeholders that embrace you, make sure that you present yourself in a trustworthy fashion. As far as the process is concerned, if you use what you don't know, learn about it. It will help you so that if you go into a job where they're using a process you haven't had the opportunity to use yet, it will help you to be up to speed. I'm sure there are UX presentations where they go into these processes in more detail. Make yourself familiar with the processes. That way, nobody will ever be able to blindside you. And you say, I haven't used that yet, but I am familiar. And then you can always go and practice it. That's for another time. You can always do a practice project and use that process and sort of to help familiarize yourself with it. So does that help, Arena? I see another new message. And don't forget, if you have questions, don't forget to post them in the Q&A area. And that way that we can separate it from all the chat stuff that's out here. I think we have time we're right up against it. I can take one or two more questions. Hey, Mark's here, our next speaker. Inclusive design is a new buzzword, but it's been around for a while. Yes, yes, it has. How do you feel about it in regards to the user-centered design process? It's part of what we should be doing. Inclusive design is an extension. It causes you to bring people who normally were not part of the design process into your overall operation. And so it just gives you another layer to help to accentuate and optimize what you're doing by giving some other people a voice earlier in the design process that they would have if you were not using an inclusive design process. So that's a great one that Mark brings up there. Inclusive design is great. There are times you can be inclusive. There's times you can't be. There's times you can be, but then the degree of inclusivity might be lower than at others. We'll find differentiations there, but definitely by far or without question, I should say, without question, make sure that you include people as much as you can, because you're going to do it one way or another, because you're going to be talking to subject matter experts and stakeholders, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be in that design room. I will also say, as an expert, make sure you're always driving. It's okay to have other people in the car with you on the trip, but if you are the UX professional in the room, don't let go of the steering wheel. You ever seen a car? Somebody was going to do a cartoon for me one day, and I'm learning how to draw now, so I guess I'll do it myself. A cartoon where there's a car with 5 people seated in it and 5 steering wheels. That they're going to have an accident. They're not going to make it back home. So if you want to do things the right way, get the input. Let them be included. I even do something in my own, I don't know anybody else that does this. I'm sure somebody does, but I would have what I call working sessions from an inclusive design perspective. And I would have my stakeholders in a room with me. And I would, as they were submitting ideas, I would visualize them. And I'm a big UX pen person. I would actually do the work. I've used Figma as well. And that same company, matter of fact, I went from UX pen to Figma at that company. They would give an idea, I would visualize it. Everybody saw it right there on the spot. Nobody's using their imagination anymore. That imagination gets visualized, and then we could get immediate feedback, and I would give them heuristic feedback on their idea, or we would test it on the spot. So that's taking it to another level. Again, I don't know I know people whiteboard things. I forget that. I'm going to go straight into the app and we're going to visualize this thing so we can see it for real. So that's what I've done when it comes to inclusive design. And I love having that, but it worked because the people who were part of the inclusive design were not trying to take the design from the UX professional, which, as many of us know, happens a lot. That's one of the dangers. They respected me as a UX professional, and they were not trying to displace me or to step on me, step over me. They weren't trying to do that. So we were able to collaborate, and we got quite a few things done. And that team, they would not do anything without bringing me into the project. Hey, we need to get Darren in on this. And they would bring me in. So that's my answer to that one. And this will be the last one, and it will, because some people will need some time for a break before we bring Mark up. Kayleen says, I'll ramble ahead. These processes are the same in an ideal vacuum, but we all know that when companies have tried to use certain processes, they're just implemented badly. Yes. For example, replacing research methods with imagination and empathy. Oh God, that's awful. Now anyone who says they use or like that process, they look, I think you're trying to say suspect here, because I see sus and I was thinking about the sus evaluation method, but I think it's trying to say suspect. Yes, the nomenclature has changed, but people's definitions of defining the problem has changed too. Absolutely right. Even though, yes, the processes should be the same, it's hard to advocate for better practices and get through to people unless you use simplistic arguments like design thinking sucks. and also remember, everything that we say, be ready to stand behind it. Which is why I presented the way I did today. Here's my hypothesis, and now here's all my evidence. Here's all my reasoning behind it, and give people a chance to go and draw conclusions based on critical thinking efforts, based on empowering them through giving them some things to think about. They're going to come up with something else. You're going to come up with something else to add to what I talked about today, so that you can look at it from a practical perspective. But this is the way we approach things. And when we give people a chance, when we trust people, and we embrace the fact that everybody brings something to the table, they really do, whether they're a UX professional or not, they bring something to the table. If we acknowledge what everybody brings to the table, you're going to have an easier time generating that trust. And then when you give them things to empower themselves, they're going to come back to you with the right answers. Not leading them, not giving them the equivalent of dark patterns, but really giving them what they need to make sound decisions. And then when they go out there and they see that it works, they're going to trust you more. And now your personal UX practice and your team's practice is going to be vaulted forward dramatically. So that's it, folks. We want to give people time for a break. So I'm going to stop here. So thank you for your participation. Oh, suspicious. And thank you for your participation. Thanks for your activity. And we're going to take a break, and then we will come back at the top of the hour for Mark's talk.